Thank you so much for coming out on a hot, sticky summer evening to listen to a room full of political candidates. You're here because something incredible is happening in this country. Barack Obama is the most radical president this nation has ever seen. And you're here, and I'm here because we are fighting to save America. Last week we saw something no one ever imagined would happen. For the first time in history, the debt of the United States of America was downgraded because this administration, Democrats and Republicans, have spent us into oblivion. Let me suggest to you the central question in the Republican primary for U.S. Senate is one question. Which candidate is best prepared to stand up and fight to stop the Obama agenda, to defend free market principles, and to defend the U.S. Constitution? I've spent a lifetime fighting and defending the U.S. Constitution. I was the Solicitor General of Texas, and I'll be talking about that record tonight. Thank you.
You can keep that one. And have a seat. Okay, now it's my turn, but I have a script. As a matter of fact, I need glasses too, so bear with me. First question. And this will be a 2-minute response. And by the way, if you'd like to follow along, we've checked, you can see it up there. For a long time, Congress and many presidents and courts have ignored or circumvented the Constitution. If you're elected, how will you stop this abuse, and will you do anything to reverse past violations?
It's a fantastic question. The federal government has expanded its power beyond the enumerated powers in the U.S. Constitution. As I mentioned, I've spent a lifetime fighting for the Constitution. I led the Center for 10th Amendment Studies at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which laid out the legal strategies, number one, to repeal every syllable of every word of Obamacare, which is absolutely unconstitutional and beyond the authority of the federal government. Number two, to dramatically shrink the size, power, and spending of the federal government. And let me suggest, this is a job interview. It's a great format. And let me suggest, what if you agree with me that what we need is a fighter, someone who's ready to stand up and fight to stop President Obama. If you were hiring a boxer, the critical question you would ask is not, do you really, really, really want to fight? It's, have you been fighting in the past? Have you been in the arena? Have you been standing up for these principles? Have you demonstrated you can win, you can take on the left and win? And so let me suggest to you, every answer I give tonight, I'm going to talk about a record of fighting to win. And I would suggest to you with every other candidate, if they stand up and just give aspirational comments and they don't talk about their record, let me suggest you consider deducting 2 points. Because if you were hiring a boxer, you'd want to know, have you been in there fighting and standing for these principles? And I've spent a lifetime fighting and standing for those principles. As the Solicitor General of Texas, I led a coalition of states before the U.S. Supreme Court arguing, for example, that the Endangered Species Act was unconstitutional as it applied to an arroyo toad in California that was being used to shut down development there. The Obama administration is using that now in West Texas with a lizard to try to shut down drilling. It's an example of the power of the federal government that has expanded beyond the Constitution, and every day in the U.S. Senate, I will fight for the Constitution.
Okay, number two, and this is also a 2-minute response. Elected officials seem to have a compelling desire to tweak the capitalistic economy because of the tweaking. What can be done to let the free enterprise capitalistic system work as in
unchain the free markets? America is a miracle of opportunity. And I say that's not just in the abstract, not as something I read in an economics textbook. My dad's from Cuba. He grew up in Cuba. He fought in the revolution. He was thrown in prison and tortured as a teenager. And he fled Cuba, coming to the U.S. in 1957 when he was 18 years old. he didn't speak a word of English. He had $100 sewn into his underwear, and he worked as a dishwasher, making 50 cents an hour to pay his way through the University of Texas. He worked and started a business, became a citizen, and worked for the American dream. That has been the miracle of America from the beginning. And you know what? There was no feel-good liberal who came to my father and said, let me put my arm around you and let me make you dependent upon the state. If he didn't work every day washing dishes, he didn't eat every day. That's the miracle of America. President Barack Obama, his vision is to transform this country into a country where the federal government controls the economy and our everyday lives. You don't have to look into a crystal ball to see where that goes. Look at what's happening in Europe. Look at what's happening in Greece. It's not complicated math. If you spend 40 cents of every dollar that's borrowed from foreign nations whose interests are not our own, if we did that in our own home life, we'd end up bankrupt. That's what this government is doing. And so the answer to opportunity, to the American dream, is to reduce taxes, to reduce regulation, to open the situation for small businesses and entrepreneurs to create businesses and create jobs. It's the reason between 2008 and 2009, more jobs were created in Texas than all 49 other states. This administration has a war on small business, and that hurts the people at the bottom trying to climb to the American dream.
Question number 3. This is a 2-minute question. Why should U.S. citizens be required by force through taxation to pay for the health care, education, incarceration, and housing of persons who entered the country illegally?
They shouldn't. Period. With one exception: incarceration. I will tell you this: if anyone in this country comes and commits a violent crime against Americans, the answer isn't to send them home, it's to lock them up, or if they murdered someone, to execute them. Now, I mentioned I would talk about my record on each issue. As the Solicitor General of Texas, I led a coalition of states before the U.S. Supreme Court arguing that those who enter the country who are violent criminals should be subject to the strictest punishment. I have a proven record fighting, and I'll tell you on immigration. Immigration is an issue. It's subject to a lot of vitriol, but it's a very simple issue. We must secure our borders. We must do everything humanly possible. In a post-9/11 world, no sovereign nation doesn't know who's coming into this country. It is lunacy that we don't know the criminal backgrounds of those coming into this country. In my view, we should do everything humanly possible to secure the borders. That includes fences, that includes walls, that includes manpower, that includes technology. That includes doing everything we can to protect ourselves as a sovereign nation. Number 2, I'm categorically opposed to amnesty. If you believe in rule of law, and our nation was built on rule of law, then you don't reward those who break the law. You know, that's unfair, among others, to those who waited in line often years or decades to immigrate here legally, and they get penalized. We have to protect the sovereignty of our nation.
Number 4, America was clearly founded on Judeo-Christian beliefs, yet today we see a constant assault on those beliefs. We also see a politically correct approach to the Islamic faith, refusing to speak the truths of its beliefs. What can be done to level the playing field?
Another terrific question. There is every day an assault on faith that is happening in this country. When I was the Solicitor General of Texas, I was appointed by Greg Abbott, the Attorney General, who I think is the finest Attorney General in all 50 states. During the 5.5 years I served as Solicitor General, over and over again, Texas led the nation defending conservative principles and defending religious liberties. We defended the Ten Commandments monument that stands on the state capitol grounds when an atheist, a homeless man, brought a lawsuit seeking to bulldoze it. And we won before the U.S. Supreme Court. We defended the Pledge of Allegiance when another atheist brought a lawsuit seeking to strike down the Pledge of Allegiance. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court and we won unanimously. There is an assault on our faith, and there is a degree of hypocrisy that's really scary. You know, if you think of the history of this country, we were formed by those fleeing religious oppression, coming here seeking God. And those who argue that we should go through the sector and sanitize the public sector, hide any reference to God or Christ or the Almighty, that's fundamentally wrong. It's contrary to the text of the Constitution, it's contrary to the understanding of the framers, and it's contrary to who we are as the American people. The Declaration of Independence begins, we hold these truths self-evident, that all men are endowed by their Creator, not by the ACLU. We need to stand up and defend religious liberty. We need to stand up and defend our faith. You know, when I worked for conservative U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft, he used to say, if I'm ever accused of being a Christian, I'd like for there to be enough evidence to convict me. That's powerfully true. It's also powerfully true of being a conservative. If you're a fighter who will fight for these principles, you will have been in the foxholes, in the trenches, and you will bear the stripes. That's what I'm running on.
Question number 5 is also a 2-minute answer. Our porous borders are a cultural, financial, and security threat to our country. All elected officials talk of securing the border, yet nothing significant gets done. If elected, what will you do to force the president to honor his obligation to secure the borders?
The sad truth of it is, neither party's serious about immigration. Neither one, not the Democrats and not the Republicans. They like using it as a political issue, and neither one is remotely serious about securing our borders. I approach the issue from the perspective of someone who's spent his entire life, or much of his professional life, in law enforcement. It is lunacy that we don't know who's coming into this country. In my view, Congress needs to stand and hold the line. Now, I hope very much the president that we're holding the line with is not President Barack Hussein Obama. I agree with that one applause there. I hope very much we have a strong conservative in the White House and a strong conservative majority in the U.S. Senate and a strong conservative majority in the U.S. House that can get serious about securing the border and can then deploy manpower. I'll tell you one of the things I'd like to see done immediately. Triple the size of the U.S. Border Patrol on day one. And that's something Congress could do through appropriations, triple the size. Provide funding. You know, one of the most effective tools for enforcing the border is helicopters. Provide funding for helicopters from aerial surveillance so that we shut down the border to those who are breaking our laws. We can do it. It's not that people don't know how to do it. It's that the political will is lacking, which goes back to the question I suggested at the beginning. Every candidate tonight is going to tell you they're going to fight against illegal immigration. You're going to hear that answer from everyone. You ought to ask 2 things. Number 1, what's your record? Have you shown you're a fighter in the past? And number 2, do you have a record of being able to get things done, of standing up and fighting the other guys who are fighting tooth and nail and winning? And if they don't have a record and they haven't been able to get things done in the past, I'm going to suggest to you they're not going to be able to get things done against Barack Obama in the White House.
This next question will be a 30-second response. Should every bill passed by the Senate contain a reference to the Constitution that justifies its constitutionality?
Absolutely yes. You know, part of the problem is most of the members of Congress don't even know what's in the Constitution. When I was a kid growing up in Houston, I was very involved in a group called the Free Enterprise Institute. As high school kids, we memorized the entire U.S. Constitution in a shortened mnemonic version. When you ask a member of Congress about a particular bill and you say, where in Article 1, Section 8 is the authority for Congress to do that, and that's where the Constitution lays out the authority of Congress, most members of Congress don't know what Article 1, Section 8 is. We need to get back to understanding what the Constitution says.
Your next 30-second response. Based on recent events in Washington, will you support any action that increases the national debt?
The recent debt deal was shameful. I was the second U.S. Senate candidate in the country to sign the Cut, Cap, and Balance pledge. I would vote to raise the debt ceiling only under one very specific circumstance: real cuts, enforceable spending caps, and most importantly, that Congress actually pass a balanced budget amendment. A handful of senators fought for that, like Senator Jim DeMint and Mike Lee and Rand Paul and Pat Toomey, all four of whom have endorsed me in this race. Because you know what? They didn't have the numbers to win in the Senate, and they've said, please send Ted to provide us reinforcement so we can actually cut the size of the federal government, so we cannot give in and cut a bad deal like, unfortunately, the Congress just did.
This last question will be your own personal question, and this one, I believe this one is 30 seconds, isn't it? Oh, it's 2 minutes. You've chosen to champion the 10th Amendment. Why did you choose that one above all others?
It's another great question. You know, right now, there are a lot of candidates that are sort of new fans of the 10th Amendment. And y'all in this room should take that as a compliment, because it's homage paid to the Tea Party that suddenly everyone is a limited government 10th Amendment candidate. I'll tell you, this ain't new for me. I told you in high school, where I was part of the Free Enterprise Institute, memorized the Constitution and traveled all over the country speaking on the Constitution, and I would write out also a definition of socialism: government ownership or control of the means of production or distribution in an economy. And I would write a quote from Thomas Jefferson: if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. The 10th Amendment limits the power of the federal government, and it does so to protect the liberty of the people. As I mentioned, this is not a newfound focus of mine. When I was in college, my senior thesis that I wrote as a teenager was on the 9th and 10th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. It was entitled "Clipping the Wings of Angels, Limiting the Power of the Federal Government." I feel incredibly fortunate right now, because my whole life I have believed in all my heart in limited government and the Constitution and individual freedom, the freedom that gave my father the ability to start with nothing and work towards the American dream. And I have the opportunity now to run it for office at a time when all across the country there is a tidal wave of men and women like each of you in this room standing up and fighting for limited government, free markets, and the Constitution. This gives me incredible hope and optimism in America. We are going to retake America. There is a great awakening that President Barack Obama has started. We will shrink the size of government, we will protect the Constitution, and most fundamentally, we will protect our liberty, because that's what this fight is all about.
Thank you. And now you'll have 2 minutes to summarize and wrap up.
I suspect I'm not the only person in this room who's been burned by a political candidate. You see people who give great speeches on the stump, and they get into office and they turn into jellyfish. You know, it's funny, all of us learned in junior high the basic principle that invertebrates can't walk upright. And yet politicians do it every single day. So how do you know? How do you know? How do you separate a good speech from somebody that has the backbone to go and stand and fight? And I'm going to encourage you again on every answer you hear to ask, not are you saying what I like, but have you been in the trenches? Do you bear the stripes? Have you been fighting for these principles? You know, my dad is a pastor now north of Dallas. And one thing he often says with respect to salvation is he tells a story of a tightrope walker that puts a tightrope across a waterfall and asks the group, how many people think I can walk across this rope and back? And the crowd applauses. He says, how many of you think I can walk across the rope and back pushing a wheelbarrow? The crowd applauds. He says, how many of you think I can walk across the rope and back pushing a wheelbarrow with a man in the wheelbarrow? And the crowd applauds. Turns to a man in the front row and says, get in the wheelbarrow. That's what it means to believe. Lots of candidates say they believe in the Constitution, but believing is not just saying you believe. It's getting in the wheelbarrow. It's spending a lifetime fighting for these principles. I will tell you, there's a candidate in this race who's a multimillionaire who will spend $10 to $20 million saturating the TV airwaves with ads painting himself as a mixture of Ronald Reagan and the Marlboro Man. I can't write a huge check. The way we're going to win this race is unifying conservatives to stand and say Texas deserves a strong constitutional conservative, and I'm here asking for your support. I'm here asking you to join me and get in the wheelbarrow, and together we will retake America. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.